My name is Vittorio Bianchi, 46 years old, Chief of Neurosurgery at Ospedale Maggiore in Bologna, Italy, and for 23 years I've believed exclusively in what I could see under a microscope. Faith was, in my professional opinion, merely a psychological coping mechanism for those lacking the intellectual fortitude to face reality's harsh truths. I didn't need comforting stories. I had MRIs, surgical protocols, and decades of peer-reviewed research. Medicine was my religion, and clinical trials were my gospel. I specialized in removing tumors considered inoperable by most of my colleagues, and my reputation had spread across Europe as the surgeon of last resort. When everyone else said impossible, patients came to me, and I succeeded most of the time. Before I tell you the rest of my story, I'm curious, where are you watching this from? If you're finding value in these testimonies of faith and medicine, consider subscribing to our channel. We share stories like mine every week, and I promise what you're about to hear will challenge everything you think you know about science and faith. In March 2017, I treated a teenage boy named Marco Fiorelli, who had been diagnosed with an aggressive glioblastoma. The tumor was nestled deep within his brainstem, in a location I'd typically consider inoperable, even with my specialized techniques. But Marco wasn't at Ospedale Maggiore for my surgical skills. He'd been admitted after collapsing at school, and I was simply the attending physician who happened to be on call. The scan showed he had weeks, perhaps a month to live. As I entered room 415 to deliver this impossible news, I found Marco sitting up in bed, tapping away at his laptop with surprising vigor for someone whose brain was being compressed by a rapidly growing mass. His mother, Lucia, sat beside him, her rosary beads moving silently through her fingers. Marco looked up and smiled, not the frightened smile of a child trying to be brave, but the genuine smile of someone at peace. "Dr. Bianchi," he said cheerfully, "I've been waiting for you." I remember thinking it was strange that he seemed to know my name, but I assumed a nurse had mentioned it. I introduced myself formally and asked how he was feeling. "Physically not great," he admitted, "but otherwise I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." There was something in his tone that unsettled me, a certainty that seemed inappropriate given his dire situation. I cleared my throat and prepared to deliver my well-rehearsed speech about his condition, prognosis, and palliative options. But before I could begin, Marco turned his laptop toward me. "I'm finishing a website about Eucharistic miracles," he said, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. "It documents over 136 instances where the consecrated host transformed physically into cardiac tissue. Scientists have confirmed the tissue is human heart muscle in many cases. Isn't that fascinating from a medical perspective, Doctor?" I glanced at the screen with poorly concealed disinterest. Religious imagery, ancient reports, church interiors. "Very interesting," I replied flatly. "Marco, I need to speak with you about your test results." I proceeded to explain as gently as possible that his tumor was inoperable, that it was growing rapidly and that we would focus on making him comfortable. I used every communication technique I'd learned over 2 decades of delivering terminal diagnoses. Marco simply nodded. "I know," he said calmly. "God showed me 2 weeks ago. That's why I've been working so hard to finish my project before I go home." I froze. "Go home?" I asked, assuming he meant palliative care. "To heaven," he clarified, as casually as if he were discussing a weekend trip to the countryside. "I'm not afraid, Dr. Bianchi. Death is just a door we all walk through eventually." His tranquility in the face of death disturbed me profoundly. How could a 15-year-old boy accept his mortality with such serenity? It was unnatural, I thought, likely a psychological defense mechanism, perhaps even denial. Over the next 3 days, Marco and I developed an unusual relationship. I visited his room frequently, ostensibly to check his neurological function, but in reality I was drawn to his extraordinary presence. Despite the tumor pressing on his brainstem, his mind remained remarkably lucid. With each visit, he would engage me in philosophical discussions about faith, science, and the nature of consciousness. "Dr. Bianchi," he asked during my second visit, "you witness the fragility of human life every day. How do you find meaning without believing in something beyond what you can touch with a scalpel?" I gave him my standard response, that I found purpose in alleviating suffering, in the dignity of human life itself. that I didn't need supernatural promises to find value in my work. Marco listened thoughtfully. But what about the suffering that has no apparent purpose? Like children who die before they've had a chance to leave any mark on the world. In your worldview, it's just random cellular misfortune, isn't it? His question struck a nerve I didn't know was exposed. I'd lost patients before, many patients, but somehow Marco had identified the precise philosophical problem that occasionally kept me awake at night. Yes, I admitted more honestly than I'd intended. Sometimes it's just bad luck at the molecular level. There's no grand design to it. Marco smiled gently. I understand why you think that way. It must be painful to see so much suffering and believe it means nothing at all. By the third day, Marco's condition had deteriorated significantly. His breathing was labored, his speech occasionally slurred, and internal bleeding had begun. His parents took shifts at his bedside, though Marco insisted they get proper rest. Don't worry, he told his exhausted father. I won't be alone when it happens. I was completing my evening rounds, intending to make Marco my final stop, when my phone rang. It was my wife, Sophia, calling from our home in the hills outside Bologna. Her voice was strained, anxious in a way I'd never heard before. Vittorio, something's wrong with Matteo. He collapsed during football practice. The coach called an ambulance. They're taking him to San Raffaele in Milan. I'm driving there now. My world tilted on its axis. Matteo, our 16-year-old son, was the picture of adolescent health, captain of his football team, top of his class, never sick beyond the occasional cold. What happened? I demanded, already rushing toward the parking garage. Did he hit his head? Was it his heart? They don't know, Sophia sobbed. He just fell over mid-run. He wasn't responding when the coach reached him. Please meet us there. I'm scared, Vittorio. I arrived at San Raffaele 3 hours later, having broken every speed limit between Bologna and Milan. I found Sophia in the waiting room, her normally immaculate appearance disheveled, eyes red from crying. Before she could speak, I spotted Dr. Elena Rossi, an old colleague from medical school, approaching with a tablet in hand and that carefully neutral expression, all doctors perfect for delivering devastating news. Vittorio, she greeted me with professional warmth that couldn't mask her gravity. I wish we were meeting under better circumstances. She led us to a private consultation room and pulled up Matteo's scans on a large monitor. What I saw made my blood run cold, a mass approximately 6-2 centimeters in his left temporal lobe. The imaging characteristics were unmistakable even before biopsy confirmation. Glioblastoma multiforme, the exact same type of tumor currently killing Marco Fiorelli back in my hospital in Bologna. The location is problematic, Elena explained gently, though she knew I could interpret the images perfectly well. It's integrated with the speech and language areas. Even with the most aggressive approach, we're looking at significant post-surgical deficits, and given the tumor's molecular profile. She trailed off, knowing I understood the abysmal survival statistics for this diagnosis. That night, as Sophia slept fitfully in the chair beside Matteo's hospital bed, I stood at the window, staring out at Milan's glittering lights. My son lay unconscious, intubated, his head bandaged after the biopsy procedure. The preliminary results confirmed what I'd known the moment I saw the scan: Weicho grade I4 glioblastoma, the most aggressive form of brain cancer. The formal pathology report would arrive tomorrow, but it would merely confirm the details of our nightmare. The standard protocol would give Matteo perhaps 14-16 months with treatment. Without intervention, significantly less. I made a decision in that moment of desperate clarity. No one would know about Matteo's diagnosis outside our immediate family. No social media updates, no prayer chains, no workplace announcements. I would protect my son from becoming the boy with brain cancer in everyone's eyes. He deserved to live whatever time remained as simply Matteo. There was another reason I didn't admit aloud. I couldn't bear the pitying looks, the whispered conversations that would stop when I entered a room, the "I'm praying for you" platitudes from well-meaning colleagues. I was Dr. Vittorio Bianchi, the neurosurgeon who had written landmark papers on glioblastoma treatment, and I couldn't save my own son. We transferred Matteo to a private clinic outside Venice, operating under pseudonyms. I took an immediate leave of absence, citing family emergency without specifics. Over the next several weeks, Matteo underwent aggressive treatment. Surgery performed by a colleague I trusted implicitly, followed by radiation and chemotherapy. The surgery removed 72% of the tumor, an impressive achievement given its location, but far from enough. Matteo lost significant language function. The boy who had once debated philosophy at the dinner table now struggled to form simple sentences. His right side was weakened, requiring intensive physical therapy. The radiation made him violently ill. He lost 13 kilograms. His thick black hair, so like mine at his age, fell out in clumps that Sophia would later find on his pillow, triggering fresh waves of grief. Through it all, Matteo maintained a quiet dignity that broke my heart. "Will I get better, Papa?" he would ask in his new, halting speech, and I would lie, stroking his forehead as I had when he was small. "Yes, Campione, just give it time." The months between March and August were a waking nightmare. By day, I researched experimental treatments, calling in favors from colleagues across the globe, reviewing every clinical trial that might accept a teenage patient. By night, I sat beside Matteo's bed in Venice, watching the poison drip into his veins, hoping it would kill the cells killing my son before it killed him. Sophia turned to prayer with an intensity that frightened me. I would find her kneeling beside our bed at 4 in the morning, whispering to the ceiling. "Who are you talking to?" I asked one night, cruelty edging my exhaustion. "No one? Sophia? Are you talking to the emptiness?" She looked at me with swollen eyes. "Then let me talk to the emptiness, Vittorio. It's all I have left. I had abandoned faith decades ago during medical school when I first understood the precise cellular mechanisms of cancer. Each malignant cell I examined under the microscope became evidence of an indifferent universe, not a loving deity. What God would design a system where children's cells could mutate and multiply until they died in agony? In August 2017, 2 devastating developments occurred simultaneously. Matteo's latest scans showed the tumor had spread to his cerebellum despite 5 months of aggressive treatment, and I received word that Marco Fiorelli, the boy I'd left behind in Bologna, had been readmitted to my hospital with pneumonia, complicating his terminal condition. His parents had requested me specifically, unaware of my personal crisis. I hesitated, but something compelled me to drive back to Bologna for a single day. Perhaps it was professional responsibility, or perhaps, though I wouldn't have admitted it then, I needed the strange comfort of Marco's philosophical perspective. When I entered room 415, Marco was dramatically worse than when I'd left. His breathing was shallow, his skin grey, his body painfully thin. Yet he smiled when he saw me. "Dr. Bianchi," he whispered, "you came back. I prayed you would." I checked his vitals, adjusted his oxygen, and pretended this was a normal patient interaction. "Your pneumonia is responding to the antibiotics," I said clinically, "but the underlying condition continues to progress." Marco nodded slightly. "I know. I'll be going home soon. But before I do, I need to tell you something important." He gestured weakly for me to come closer. I leaned down, and he spoke words that shattered my carefully constructed reality. "Your son Matteo has glioblastoma, doesn't he? Stage 4, with recent spread to the cerebellum. You've been treating him in Venice under your wife's maiden name." I stumbled backward, knocking over a tray of medical supplies. The crash brought a nurse running, but I waved her away without taking my eyes off Marco. "What did you say?" I demanded once we were alone. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. "How could you possibly know that?" Marco's eyes held mine with unexpected strength. "No one told me. God showed me 3 nights ago. I woke up at 3:15 in the morning with your son's name in my heart, Matteo Bianchi. I saw his face, his struggle, and I saw you, Dr. Bianchi, dying inside while trying to appear strong for everyone else. If you've been moved by this story so far, I'd love to know you're out there with me. Take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. In the comments, I'm curious, have you ever experienced something science couldn't explain? Share your story with our community. Sometimes the most profound healing begins when we realize we're not alone in our experiences. I had to leave immediately. I muttered something about checking test results and practically ran to the doctor's lounge, locking the door behind me. I splashed cold water on my face, trying to regain my composure. My scientific mind raced through possible explanations. Had Matteo's case been discussed at a conference? Impossible. We'd used pseudonyms, different hospital systems. Had someone followed us? Absurd. We'd been meticulously careful. Could it be coincidence? A lucky guess. The specific details Marco mentioned made that statistically impossible. There was simply no way he could know what he knew. When I returned 30 minutes later, Marco was alone. His parents had gone to the chapel to pray. "I'm sorry if I frightened you," he said with a weak smile. "That wasn't my intention, but God was very insistent that I needed to tell you this before I go." I sat beside his bed, my curiosity stronger than my shock. "Tell me what exactly?" Marco closed his eyes as if listening to something inaudible to me, then spoke words that would change my life forever. "God has told me 3 things about Matteo," he began softly. "First, he will not die from this cancer. I know the medical statistics suggest otherwise, but God has different plans. Second, the healing won't come from medicine. It will come from something you don't yet understand, something you can't measure with your instruments, but which is more real than anything you've seen through your microscopes. And third, you need to stop carrying this burden alone. Your wife, Sophia, is praying, but you're blocking her. Her prayers are bouncing off the walls of your skepticism. The miracle God wants to perform requires you to relinquish control." I was overwhelmed, torn between disbelief and desperate hope. "Marco," I said carefully, "even if I believed all this, I can't just have faith. It doesn't work that way. I can't force myself to believe." Marco nodded understandingly. "I'm not asking you to force anything. I'm only asking you to be open, that when you see what's coming, you don't immediately dismiss it as coincidence or rationalize it away. Promise that you'll at least consider that perhaps there's more to this universe than what your instruments can detect." That evening, I drove back to Venice in complete silence, the radio off, my thoughts too loud for additional noise. When I arrived at the private clinic, Sophia was in Matteo's room reading aloud from his favorite book while he dozed fitfully. "How was Bologna?" she asked mechanically. Instead of my usual non-committal response, I felt something break inside me. "Sophia, I need to tell you something strange." And I told her everything about Marco, how he knew about Matteo, his prophecy of healing. Sophia dropped the book she was holding. "Vittorio, I've been praying every night for 6 months, and now a dying boy knows everything." She began to laugh hysterically through her tears, a sound that held both desperation and the first hint of hope I'd heard in months. Marco Fiorelli died at 5:30 the following morning. I was in my temporary office at the Venice clinic when the call came from Bologna. I found myself whispering, "Goodbye, Marco," though I'd never done anything like that before. Later that day, Nurse Francesca approached me hesitantly. "Dr. Bianchi, before he lost consciousness, the boy asked for you. He said, 'Tell the doctor to keep his promise.'" I hadn't explicitly promised anything, but I knew what he meant. I had promised to be open. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done since childhood. I entered a church alone, simply to sit. I chose the Basilica di San Marco, not far from the clinic. The vast space was nearly empty except for a few tourists photographing the golden mosaics. I sat in the back pew, staring at the crucifix. "I don't know if you're there," I said to the empty space. "I don't know how to pray, but if Marco was right, if you exist, if you care, I need a miracle. Not for me, for Matteo." The silence that followed brought no immediate answers, but for the first time in decades, I felt something like hope flickering in my chest, where only cold scientific cynicism had lived before. The next few days passed in a blur. I continued overseeing Matteo's care, but something fundamental had shifted within me. Sophia insisted we attend Marco's funeral. "We need to," she said simply. On October 3rd, we found ourselves in the Basilica di San Petronio in Bologna. Hundreds filled every pew, classmates, teachers, families touched by Marco's life. During the homily, the priest spoke of how Marco had lived each day with eternity in mind, using technology to evangelize, loving the Eucharist with contagious passion. Marco didn't fear death because he knew the giver of life. Now he lives more fully than anyone here. After the Mass, Marco's mother Lucia spotted me across the crowded piazza and embraced me wordlessly. "Marco prayed for your son every night," she said, her eyes red but steady. "He told me, Dr. Bianchi needs to see that God is real. Trust what my son saw." I didn't know how to respond. I merely nodded, my throat too tight for words. 1 week after the funeral on October 10th, we took Matteo for his scheduled MRI in Venice. He had been especially weak that week, sleeping nearly 20 hours daily. Both Sophia and I had made our peace with the inevitable. Dr. Gabriella Conti ran the routine scan. An hour later, she entered with an unreadable expression. "Dr. Bianchi, I need you to see something unusual." "Doctor." Conti placed the recent results on screen, side by side with those from 2 weeks prior. "It doesn't make sense," she murmured. "Matteo's tumor markers have dropped significantly, and the cerebellar lesions are 35% smaller than they were 2 weeks ago." I leaned toward the screen, my oncologist's brain automatically shifting into analytical mode. "That's unusual, but it happens. Delayed response to treatment." Conti shook her head emphatically. "Vittorio, we suspended aggressive therapy 3 weeks ago because it was no longer effective. Matteo has only been on basic palliative care. This shouldn't be happening medically." And in that moment, Marco's words echoed in my mind like bells. "The healing won't come from medicine. It will come from something that science cannot measure." I felt dizzy. Sophia grabbed my arm. "Vittorio, what does this mean?" Her voice trembled between hope and fear of hoping too much. "I don't know," I admitted honestly, "but we're going to monitor it closely." Over the next 2 weeks, something medically inexplicable continued. Each test showed improvement. Tumor markers steadily decreasing. Cerebellar metastases reduced by 65%. Conti convened a panel of 3 neuro-oncologists from Milan and Rome. They spent hours examining every scan, every biopsy. Their conclusion: spontaneous remission of unknown etiology. In medical language, we have no idea what's happening. On November 2nd, All Souls Day, Matteo woke at 6:15 a.m. with unusual energy. Sophia and I heard his voice call out, "Mom, Dad, come here." We ran in, fearing an emergency. He was sitting up in bed, his eyes brighter than they'd been in months. "I dreamed about a boy," he said clearly, the most fluid speech he'd managed since surgery. He had dark hair, he wore a hoodie with anime characters on it. He said his name was Marco, and that I don't have to be afraid anymore. He said Jesus sent him to tell me that I'm going to be okay, that I still have many things to do here. My heart stopped. Sophia looked at me with enormous eyes. I had never told Matteo about Marco Fiorelli. "Matteo," I asked carefully, "did this boy tell you anything else?" He nodded. He showed me a computer with pictures of glowing bread and told me, "Tell your father to stop doubting. Miracles don't need scientific explanation." Those were the exact words Marco had used with me. The room seemed to spin. Sophia embraced Matteo, crying. I stepped into the hallway, unable to breathe properly. My hands trembled as I dialed Lucia Fiorelli's number. When she answered, I could barely speak. "Signora Fiorelli, I need to talk with you. My son just dreamed of Marco." And he gave him a message for me. There was a pause, then her soft voice. "Dr. Bianchi, I've been expecting your call. Marco told me you would call exactly 3 weeks after his death. Today is the 21st day." That same afternoon, I met with Lucia Fiorelli at a cafe near the Ospedale Maggiore. She arrived carrying a folder filled with papers, photographs, and notebooks. "This is what Marco wrote about you and your son," she said, sliding the material across the weathered wooden table. My hands trembled as I opened the folder. There were pages upon pages in Marco's teenage handwriting, dated from August 2017, a full month before I met him in the hospital. Matteo Bianchi, 16 years old, glioblastoma, stage 4. Father, Dr. Vittorio, neurosurgeon, doesn't believe in God. God says he will find them both, that the doctor needs to see to believe, and that Matteo will be healed so the entire family will return to the Father. There were specific details no one could know: my work schedule, the address of the private clinic in Venice, even the name of the treating oncologist. Tears ran freely down my face without any ability to control them. Lucia took my hand across the table with motherly gentleness. "Doctor, my son had a gift since childhood. God showed him things, people who needed prayer, situations that required divine intervention. Marco would pray for hours each day for people he had never physically met." Lucia opened Marco's old laptop she had brought with her. "I want to show you something," she said as she powered up the machine. The screen flickered to life, revealing a desktop with meticulously organized icons. She opened a Word document titled Prayer Intentions, August 2017. My breathing stopped when I saw line 43. Matteo Bianchi, 16, glioblastoma. Father needs awakening. Pray 3 rosaries daily until healing or until God says stop. The document date, August 5th, 2017, 6 weeks before Marco arrived dying at my hospital. "How is this possible?" I whispered, staring at the screen as if it were a mathematical equation my brain couldn't process. Lucia smiled gently, tears in her own eyes. "Dr. Bianchi, you spend your life studying how the human body works at the cellular level. That's beautiful, it's important, it's God's sacred work. But there's another dimension of reality your microscopes can't capture. Marco lived with one foot in this world and one in the next, and since he departed, he continues to intercede from heaven for the people on his list." I closed the laptop slowly. All my scientific training, all my years of carefully constructed skepticism were crumbling like a sandcastle before the tide. In December 2017, exactly 12 weeks after the onset of Matteo's spontaneous remission, Dr. Conti ordered a complete PET scan to evaluate the current status of his cancer. Sophia and I sat in the waiting room for 2 interminable hours while they processed the results. I had brought work from the hospital, other patients' files I was remotely consulting on, trying to distract my anxious mind, but I couldn't concentrate at all. Every few minutes I checked my watch, calculating how much longer we would have to wait in this agony of uncertainty. Sophia prayed silently with her rosary, something she had begun to do openly after Matteo's dream about Marco. Her lips moved without sound, fingers methodically counting the beads. Finally, after what felt like eternity, Dr. Conti called us into her office. Her face was carefully neutral, that professional expression doctors develop to reveal nothing prematurely. She sat behind her desk, took a deep breath, pulled up the PET scan images on the large monitor, and looked us directly in the eyes. "Vittorio, Sophia," she began with controlled voice, then made a long, deliberate pause that made my heart pound so loudly I could hear it in my ears. "In 31 years of oncological practice, I have never seen absolutely anything like this in my entire career." Conti turned the monitor toward us. "The cancer has completely disappeared. There is no trace of glioblastoma anywhere in Matteo's body. There are no residual lesions, no scars. There is no indication whatsoever that he ever had extensive metastasis in multiple brain regions. It's as if the last 9 months never happened medically." Sophia began to sob with uncontrollable joy, embracing me with desperate strength. I was completely stunned, staring fixedly at the images on the bright screen. Conti was absolutely right. It was like looking at the perfectly healthy brain of a boy who had never had terminal cancer. "I need to review this personally," I said, automatically standing and approaching the monitor with trained oncologist's eyes. I magnified each section meticulously, cerebellum clear, temporal lobe perfect, brainstem normal, all completely clean. Conti handed me a thick folder of comprehensive documentation. "I've documented absolutely everything with scientific rigor, every previous scan, every positive biopsy, every blood test showing aggressive progression of the cancer, and now this. I'm going to present the case at the European Conference on Neuro-Oncology in March. We need other international specialists to review and verify it." I sat down again, feeling as if the floor were moving beneath my feet. "What is your official medical explanation?" I asked, desperately needing to hear her professional perspective as a colleague. Conti carefully removed her glasses, cleaned them with a cloth handkerchief, a gesture I immediately recognized as a strategy to gain time and formulate a careful response. "Officially in the medical record, I'm going to document it as complete spontaneous remission, an extremely rare phenomenon but technically recognized in scientific medical literature. Unofficially, she paused significantly, looking directly at the framed photo of her own family on her desk. I sincerely believe we have just witnessed something that modern science cannot adequately explain with our current models. And honestly, Vittorio, after literally seeing thousands of children die painfully during my career, I am perfectly at peace with not being able to explain it scientifically. I'm just profoundly grateful to witness this. That evening at home, after putting Matteo to bed, who was sleeping peacefully without pain for the first time in months, Sophia and I sat on our sofa in contemplative silence. "Do you still believe this is all coincidence?" she asked softly, without accusation in her tone. I slowly shook my head. No, I can no longer deny the obvious. Something beyond medicine saved our son. And that teenage boy somehow knew it would happen before it did. Sophia took my hand. "Marco is praying for us from heaven, isn't he?" I nodded with tears. "Yes, I believe he is." Christmas 2017 was the strangest, most beautiful, and most emotional celebration of our entire lives. For the first time in 9 devastating months, Matteo had genuine, sustained energy. His hair was beginning to grow back. Soft brown curls covering his previously bald head. He had gained healthy weight. His cheeks had natural pink color. His speech was almost completely normalized, though certain complex words still challenged him. Sophia decorated our entire house as never before, with bright lights in every window, a huge tree touching the ceiling, Christmas music playing constantly. We invited our extended families for a large dinner and finally told them the complete truth about Matteo's secret cancer, the clandestine treatment in Venice, the miraculous, unexplainable remission. The reactions varied tremendously. My father, also a retired surgeon, meticulously analyzed all the medical records with his characteristic scientific skepticism, but finally admitted with humility, "Son, sometimes in medicine we simply have to humbly accept that there are clear limits to our current knowledge." Sophia's mother simply said with conviction, "I knew something terrible was wrong with my grandson. God answered all my secret prayers, but the person who surprised us most completely was my younger brother Francesco, a priest in a small parish in rural Tuscany. When I told him in detail about Marco Fiorelli, his face literally lit up with recognition. "Vittorio, do you realize who Marco Fiorelli is?" Francesco asked with genuine amazement. "That boy is already extremely famous in Catholic circles throughout Italy and beyond. He died in what we call the odor of sanctity, a recognized sign of holiness. There's a strong international movement for his official beatification. Thousands of people go to pray at his tomb monthly. If he truly specifically interceded for Matteo with this medically impossible outcome, you absolutely need to officially document it with the Church. It could become a fundamental part of his canonization cause as a saint." That crucial conversation planted an important seed that would dramatically change the course of my life in the following years. In January 2018, 3 months after Matteo's complete verified healing, I did something I never imagined doing in my previous atheist life. I formally contacted the Archbishop of Bologna to officially report a possible medical miracle. I met with Monsignor Ferretti, a wise elderly priest responsible for evaluating reports of extraordinary phenomena for the diocese. I meticulously presented all the exhaustive medical documentation, original biopsies unequivocally showing malignant glioblastoma, multiple scans showing extensive metastasis in several brain regions, serial blood tests showing aggressive progression, and then suddenly the complete inexplicable remission. I also carefully showed him Marco's personal notebooks, where my son was specifically listed in his prayer intentions weeks before we physically met. Monsignor Ferretti reviewed absolutely everything with rigorous thoroughness for more than 2 hours without interruption. He took detailed notes, asked surprisingly sophisticated medical questions, examined each document with a literal magnifying glass. "Dr. Bianchi," he finally said with gravity, "this is certainly extraordinary and deserves serious investigation. But you must understand that the official process of verifying miracles for causes of sainthood is extremely lengthy and rigorously demanding. It will require multiple independent panels of specialist physicians, including specifically skeptics and non-Catholics, to exhaustively review the complete case. It can easily take years, possibly entire decades to complete. I told him I perfectly understood the complexity, but I also confessed something that surprised myself saying aloud. Monsignor, just 4 months ago I was a completely convinced atheist. I firmly believed that religion was simple superstition for intellectually weak people. But that extraordinary 15-year-old boy showed me something profound that no scientific study had ever shown me, that there definitely exists a dimension of reality beyond what we can measure with instruments. And if my personal story can genuinely help other people discover that transformative truth, then I absolutely want it properly documented with all rigor. Monsignor smiled warmly. Doctor, your testimony is powerful precisely because you were so skeptical before. The following months brought continuous profound transformations in every aspect of our family life. In February, Matteo returned triumphantly to school, something we had secretly feared would never happen again. His classmates were genuinely amazed to see him so full of vibrant energy. Sophia gradually returned to her architecture career, designing as her first returning project a beautiful small chapel for a community on the outskirts of Bologna. Something she said was her personal tangible way of thanking God. And I began an intense spiritual journey I never anticipated. I started attending Sunday Mass simply for Matteo, thinking it was the least I could do, given what we had miraculously experienced. The first few times I felt deeply uncomfortable, completely out of place, mechanically reciting prayers I didn't really understand. But gradually something fundamental changed within me. I began to see profound connections between my medical work and my emerging faith. Each intricate cell I studied under the microscope was an astonishing testimony to intelligent design. Each patient I successfully saved was a humble reminder that medicine is a divine gift to alleviate human suffering. Not the absolute only power in the universe as I had arrogantly believed. In May, I made a decision that surprised absolutely everyone at the hospital. I established a small personal altar in my private office with a printed photo of Marco Fiorelli, smiling in his anime hoodie, and a votive candle I kept constantly burning during my long working hours. My medical colleagues initially thought I had experienced some kind of serious nervous breakdown, but I knew the profound truth. I had experienced an authentic spiritual awakening. In June 2018, 8 months after Marco's death, we visited his tomb for the first time as a family. He had been ceremoniously transferred to Assisi at his family's explicit request, buried in the historic sanctuary of the Spoliation. Sophia, Matteo and I made the 2-hour drive from Bologna on a sunny summer Saturday. The sanctuary was architecturally small and simple, built precisely on the spot where St. Francis had dramatically stripped himself of his worldly possessions centuries earlier. There were approximately a dozen people praying in. I'll continue the script from where it left off. In June 2018, 8 months after Marco's death, we visited his tomb for the first time as a family. He had been ceremoniously transferred to Assisi at his family's explicit request, buried in the historic sanctuary of the Spoliation. Sophia, Matteo and I made the 2-hour drive from Bologna on a sunny summer Saturday. The sanctuary was architecturally small and simple, built precisely on the spot where St. Francis had dramatically stripped himself of his worldly possessions centuries earlier. There were approximately a dozen people praying in reverent silence when we arrived. Marco's tomb was completely covered with colorful fresh flowers, handwritten notes, and photographs left by people who had been deeply touched by his short but impactful story. Matteo knelt spontaneously before the tomb without anyone asking him to. "Thank you, Marco," he whispered in a clear voice, "for asking Jesus to heal me when I didn't even know how to pray. When I grow up, I want to help sick children, exactly like you helped me." His simple yet profound words broke me completely. Sophia and I immediately knelt on either side of our precious son, forming an intimate family circle of gratitude. I still didn't technically know how to pray properly by formal religious standards, but I spoke directly from my heart, without filters. "Marco, I didn't know you sufficiently in life. 3 brief days weren't enough to truly understand who you were and what you represented, but you completely saved my son, when I, with all my experience and medical knowledge, couldn't do absolutely anything. You showed me there is definitely more to existence than simply cells and molecules interacting. Teach me, please, to live with the same unshakable certainty you had. Teach me to see God present in my daily work, in my suffering patients, in every moment of my life. I felt a profound peace descend upon me that honestly I cannot adequately describe with medical or scientific words. It was as if something invisible yet completely real had directly touched my soul. In September 2018, exactly 1 year after Marco's terminal leukemia diagnosis, Lucia invited me personally to speak publicly at a large memorial event in Bologna. I initially nervously declined, feeling completely inadequate to speak publicly about religious faith when I was barely learning the most basic concepts. But Lucia insisted wisely, "Doctor, your story is incredibly powerful, precisely because you were so skeptical before." So I found myself standing nervously before approximately 300 people in the spacious auditorium of Santa Maria della Vita Parish, telling my transformative story publicly for the first time. I spoke honestly about my long career treating devastating pediatric brain tumors, about my convinced atheism, about Matteo's secret terminal cancer, about meeting Marco in his final 3 days. When I reached the crucial part, where Marco knew absolutely impossible details about my son, I saw genuine tears on many moved faces. As a rigorous scientist, I said, looking directly at the audience, I was exhaustively trained to believe exclusively in what I can objectively measure, experimentally prove, consistently replicate in controlled laboratory conditions. But Marco profoundly taught me that there are completely real phenomena that totally transcend those methodological limits. Love is absolutely real, but cannot be measured in grams. Hope is completely real, but doesn't appear on any blood test. And God is totally real, although I cannot see him directly under any microscope. After my emotional talk, literally dozens of people approached with their own incredible stories of how Marco had touched their lives in inexplicable ways. One woman held a worn rosary. "Marco personally gave me this 2 weeks before dying. He told me prophetically that I would need it for something important soon. 1 week later, my husband was diagnosed with aggressive brain tumor. Christmas 2018 symbolically marked 1 complete year since Matteo's verified miraculous healing. To celebrate this significant anniversary, we made a profound family decision. All 3 of us would be formally baptized in public ceremony. I had technically been baptized as an infant in a formal Catholic ceremony without any personal meaning, but I wanted to do it again consciously as an adult who genuinely understands and freely chooses Christian faith. Sophia also wanted to publicly renew her forgotten baptism, and Matteo, having turned 17, firmly declared he wanted to make it official with Jesus forever. The ceremony was held in the historic San Petronio Basilica on December 24th during the solemn midnight Christmas Mass. The same elderly priest who had emotionally celebrated Marco's funeral presided over our ceremony. When the cold, blessed water touched my bowed head, I vividly felt as if years of accumulated cynicism and hardness of heart were completely washed away. Sophia openly wept with pure joy. Matteo smiled with that radiant smile we thought we had forever lost. Lucia Fiorelli and her husband Andrea were present as our official spiritual godparents, a special honor we had humbly requested and they had accepted with tears. After the transformative ceremony, Lucia embraced me tightly, whispering, "Marco is gloriously celebrating in heaven today. He prophetically saw this coming. He wrote it in his private notes a month before dying." The following years brought continuous transformations at all levels. In 2021, 14 years after briefly knowing Marco, he was officially beatified as Blessed Marco Fiorelli by the Catholic Church, based on a rigorously verified medical miracle in Brazil. Sophia, Matteo, and I traveled excitedly to Assisi for the historic beatification ceremony on October 10th. There were literally thousands of people, especially young people wearing T-shirts with Marco's smiling photo. During my formal testimony before the ecclesiastical tribunal years earlier, one of the expert theologians had directly asked me, "Dr. Bianchi, How can you be absolutely certain that your son's healing was genuinely miraculous and not simply a rare natural medical case? My answer had been clear. Because Marco knew things that were literally impossible to know. Because he specifically prayed for my son before we ever met. Because his healing began exactly when Marco died. And because my complete spiritual transformation is inseparably intertwined with his physical healing. Today in 2025, 19 years after those 3 days that forever changed my life, I continue working as a neurosurgeon at Ospedale Maggiore. But my approach fundamentally changed. I now see each patient not just as a medical case, but as a soul beloved by God. Matteo recently completed his residency in pediatric neurosurgery. Sophia designed a beautiful chapel in the hospital dedicated to Marco Fiorelli. And every October 12th, the anniversary of his death, our family faithfully travels to Assisi to give thanks at his tomb. Marco will be officially canonized as a saint in April 2026. When people ask how a scientific physician can believe in miracles, I simply respond, because I lived one. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to subscribe to our channel and share your own experiences in the comments below. Each of us carries a unique story of transformation, whether dramatic like mine or quiet and gradual. What matters is that we share these testimonies with each other, creating a community where faith and reason can exist in harmony rather than opposition. Have you witnessed something science couldn't explain? Has someone in your life been a Marco, showing you a deeper reality beyond what's immediately visible? I'd be honored to hear your story. And remember, the greatest miracles often begin in our darkest moments. Thank you for walking this journey with me.